What better laboratory than the blood-soaked battlefield?
So, to try something a little different this time, I will be covering a topic tangentially related to the doll I'm making. So to go along with the Plague Doctor from Darkest Dungeon, I will be covering negligence, malpractice, and medical error in medicine. Now, medical professionals are generally held to a much higher standard than, say, your local sandwich technician. This is good. I mess up and you end up with mayo you didn't want in your sandwich. Surgeons mess up and you end up with a scalpel left outside of you. Happens a little more often than you might find comfortable. As was the case with Glenford Turner, whose lawyer went on record as saying, "It's a level of incompetence that's incomprehensible." Medical malpractice, in terms of a number of death cause, would technically be the third leading cause of death. That's right, you've got modern day plague doctors. I swear, this will tie together nicely here in a second. So, for some historical context, plague doctors weren't real doctors. Real doctors being here in quotations because we're talking about before the 1850s when germ theory was popularized, so they were still kind of operating under this misguided notions of medicine, most of which either fell under two categories. Either maladies were spiritual in nature, or they kind of fell under miasma theory. But they were at least on the right track. It would have actually helped removing diseased flesh that was causing bad odors due to anaerobic bacteria. And some diseases like tuberculosis, measles, influenza, and smallpox do infect through airborne transmission, and not breathing that in means you're probably not going to get infected as well. But you see, plague doctors didn't even really know anything about this. They were usually farmers who would don these outfits, who would think, you know what, this jackass can cure diseases, why can't I? No medical training required. You see, doctors, along with most of the rich, they just kind of ran off to the countryside thinking, you know what, let's just let the poor die in the cities and we're gonna stay far away from that. And so these plague doctors left to their own devices usually ended up doing more harm than good. They would often end up spreading the disease not only to other patients but to themselves, and some of them just basically were glorified body counters. Now, it's easy to look back on this and think, oh thank God, technology is advanced and people are a lot smarter than they were back then. But really, only the first part of that would be true. You see, people are just as prone to ignorance, errors, or bad judgment, and outright stupidity as they were 500 years ago. Now, there's thousands of cases I could point to here, but there's actually one I want to talk about, a famous case, a surgeon, by the name Larry Mitchell Isaacs. He removed a healthy kidney from a patient going in for colon surgery. He lost his license, and he still continued to practice medicine in Ohio. Oh yeah, that's the thing. You see, you can lose your medical license in one state and still be able to practice it in another. Wait, what? So, my doctor could have overprescribed medication to a 2-month-old child, having led to its death, and a medical board of directors decided that doctor was unfit for practice, took away his license, and that doctor could have moved to a different state and be continuing to practice? Yeah. What the? Now, what information is actually retained varies by state. You can see here in Arizona, you won't know about discipline by other state boards, you won't know about felony convictions, other fraud cases, loss of hospital privileges, or any malpractice suits they're involved in. And it doesn't get better by any other state. Disciplined by other state boards, very few of them do. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Oh. Fortunately, sites like DocInfo exist, which will give you some information, but they don't give you the entire picture. Congress mandated something called the NPDB, the National Practitioner Database. Now, this keeps track of mistakes that physicians make and catalogs them and is available to licensed providers, but not to patients. And it was made this way by certain special interest groups like the American Medical Association, who wanted a lot of this information kept confidential. And this information is pretty secretive, as is the case with Robert Sack, a psychiatrist that was practicing in Maryland, who permanently surrendered his license in 2012 rather than face discipline, the reason stated being unprofessional conduct in the practice of medicine, which is about as inspecific as it could possibly be. He went on to practice in Pennsylvania and is now appears to be at T.W. Ponessa and Associates in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Sheen Yetman was a heart surgeon in Madison, Wisconsin, who performed only 7 surgeries, 2 of which led to someone's death and consequent malpractice cases. He lost his license and now looks like he's still continuing to practice in Brooklyn, New York. Though he is a vascular surgeon, which is a little bit of a step down, and maybe this is an instance where the system actually ends up working out. But these decisions are being made behind closed doors, and the information isn't open to patients to decide whether or not they want this particular person as their doctor. Now, certain online sites do try to collect reviews, but these are dubiously reliable at best. Who knows exactly? I mean, you know how online reviews are. 5-star review, truly blessed. 1-star reviews with no reasoning as to why. This doctor has a 3.7 rating, but that's only because there's 3 ratings. One of which is a 1-star review, and there's 2 5-star reviews with no explanation in the 1-star review. Who knows exactly how much this person really knows about medicine? I mean, they could really be onto something, or maybe it's all bullshit. We don't know. Well, unless your plague doctor got famous enough to have journals written about him and his particular mistakes so that his name is easily Googleable, you just might be out of luck finding information about him. But, of course, this all gets a lot worse when you look at national statistics, because these are just the famous cases. Before we get into that, though, let's first take a look at what exactly constitutes medical malpractice. Under the legal definition, you must first prove 3 things. 1. A violation of the standard of care, otherwise known as negligence. This would be where a physician undertakes treatment that would be considered outside of the range of acceptable medical treatment. 2. You must prove an injury was caused by the negligence. A violated standard of care is not malpractice if it does not actually cause injury. Of course it has to be this way, or else any kind of alternative or holistic medicine would have just been immediately sued. And finally, 3. The injury must have resulted in significant damages. Even if mistakes were made up to this point, as long as there's no harm, then there's no foul. And these forms of malpractice usually fall into a couple categories. The first is usually some failure of diagnosis, usually being either misdiagnosis, delayed diagnosis, or failure to treat a correct diagnosis. Surgical errors are also a common one, as are birth injuries and medical implant failures. To look a little more at specific injuries, though, there are hospital-acquired infections, otherwise known as HAIs, which occur at 1.7 million per year, and this leads to 99,000 deaths per year. Avoidable birth injuries will happen at a rate of 3.6%, which means 157,700 cases per year. This can include things like the doctor deciding to deliver a baby prematurely, resulting in brain damage, or injuries to the mother, such as causing too much damage during a cesarean, or improper use of medical equipment, such as the forceps. Babies do have very soft skulls after all, and if a doctor is a little forceful, you can easily cause brain damage. Drug-related errors, that's like overprescribing somebody or giving somebody the wrong medication, leading to deaths, account for about 70,000 deaths per year. Or at least that was the case in 1993. Other sources report a little lower, but all report a general decline in recent years. Retained surgical instruments, or RSIs, occur at a rate about 1 in 5,500 surgeries, and with about 50 million surgeries performed per year is about 9,000 cases per year in the US. RSIs being like the case I mentioned earlier, where a scalpel was left in a man's abdomen. And remember, this is 9,000 cases per year. These events should, never happen. There is a rather famous report released in 1999, To Err is Human, which was funded by the Institute of Medicine and concluded that there was between 44,000 to 98,000 deaths per year caused by medical malpractice, though many experts have stated that the IOM's claims were low. And it does make sense, there is a little bit of a conflict of interest here. The Institute of Medicine is basically just a board of physicians that definitely have a conflict of interest in wanting you to think that their profession is a little safer than it actually is. A study from the British Medicine Journal estimates that there's about 400,000 deaths per year, though this other source claims that there's around 250,000. These numbers are, after all, a little hard to pin down, so it makes sense there will be some variation. What one person might consider medical malpractice might not fit into another's definition, and we may never know exactly where those numbers lie. As these are only documented cases, who knows exactly how many cases aren't reported or taken to court? When not just looking at deaths, this study in the Journal of Health Affairs estimates 1.5 million medical errors, 400,000 of which are considered never events. So there's a couple important things to point out here about this data. 1. This only deals with deviations from a socially accepted standard of care, which can differ from person to person and is a little bit subjective. Modern medicine by no means has everything figured out. I mean, we've certainly advanced from our days in the Dark Ages where standard of care involved diagnosis under the notion of miasma theory, which is to say it's pretty trustable. And as much as doctors want you to think that they know what they're doing and the system is trustworthy, and it is important for people to have faith in that system to protect them from medical concerns they can't possibly be knowledgeable about without getting a PhD themselves, inevitably, some medical practitioners will fall to the lower end of the bell curve and are little better than farmers in plague doctor outfits. Though of course the medical community itself wants to weed those individuals out. It is, after all, a quite rigorous process to get your PhD to practice medicine to begin with. But just as much of the time it seems that the community tries to protect those individuals as well, as we see time and time again with medical practitioners who make mistakes, who really should lose their license and never be practicing medicine again. They'll just pick up and move to a different state. Now, I'm willing to admit that there's a little bit of nuance here. Like, alright, you're a doctor of 30 years who specializes in whatever kind of surgery, and you made a mistake once and accidentally removed a woman's fallopian tube. Do you really deserve to lose your license? Everyone makes mistakes, right? I mean, I would argue, yes, absolutely. You mess up this bad, there's no coming back. But maybe some forgiveness is in order. After all, to err is human. And practicing medicine is notoriously difficult. If you want a little bit better of an idea of the complexity involved in making these diagnoses, I highly recommend you check out a channel called Chubby Emu, where he will actually break down exactly certain cases and how these diseases progress. So let's take a step back from the wide-angle lens of national statistics and focus a little more on person-to-person interactions with your doctor, and how biases and discrimination can affect the care you receive. I think you'll find that in your experience with interactions with doctors, as with most people in life, if you're generally just trying to be a pleasant person, I mean, people are more likely to want to help you. But, of course, this doesn't apply to cases of discrimination, of which inevitably exists in medicine, as with everywhere else in the world. Discrimination against people of color, women, people of differing genders and sexualities, and other minority groups has historically been a major problem. Women are at least no longer diagnosed with hysteria due to their uterus moving around. No, seriously, but that didn't actually go away as a medical diagnosis until like the 19th century. But all of this still exists in some form in our society, and is something you should definitely be aware of. If you don't feel comfortable with your doctor and the way they're treating you, then do find a new one. Racial discrimination in medicine means you're more likely to have and develop chronic conditions, and also have less money spent on your healthcare. Some of this lies in discrimination on an individual basis to practitioners who, with implicit or explicit biases, giving less care. But most of this is a deeper issue rooted in systematic racism and inequality, where people are segregated into lower income areas, and these lower income areas receive less attention and money devoted to hospitals and healthcare. Congress has actually taken steps to deal with this and has mandated the creation of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which every year releases a report called the National Healthcare Quality and Disparities Report, which is quite extensive. You can actually check it out here if you would like, and I recommend you do so, but it's a lot. Though, kind of despite all of this, the one defining factor in how much medical care you receive is how rich you are. I mean, the more money you have to spend on doctors and specialized surgeons, the better off your care is going to be. I mean, capitalism really does just kind of want the poor to die. Though one surprising way you can face discrimination is as a result of obesity. There have been horror stories of negligence of doctors because they would just take people's issues less seriously because they believe it to be a result of poor health choices, which usually it's not. And as a result, doctors miss diagnoses that they would otherwise be able to catch. Just something you really ought to be aware of. Despite all of this and the many rampant problems with our healthcare system, we still in the US have one of the better healthcare systems in the world. Like, just living here puts you in about the top 10% of wealthy people in the world. Like, screw a 3.6% birth injury rate. When you look at places like Sierra Leone, 1 in 17 mothers will die of childbirth. There's a 7% infant mortality rate. And this is actually something you can do right now to help prevent that. If you want to donate to Partners in Health, they're actually trying to fix that as we speak. Because despite like all of these problems that we have with our healthcare system, there are places around the world right now where they literally have plague doctors working for them because that's all they have. And finally, if you would like to support my channel, please subscribe and please donate to my Patreon if you would. I will continue to make these videos for free, but if this pays my bills, there will be regular content. Thank you and good night.